The wind on the Llano Estacado had no manners. It came down from the north in the dry winter of 1869, smelling of iron and distance, and it pushed against the small ranch house of Eliza Hart as if it meant to shove it clear off the plains. The wind was a constant caller, rattling the single window frame, stealing the warmth from the stove wood, and coating every surface with a film of pale dust. Eliza Hart, a widow at 27 years, knew the wind well. It was her only steady neighbor. Her land was a small square of stubbornness pressed against the worn groove of the Santa Fe Trail. Freighters passed, and soldiers, and hopeful men whose wagons kicked up the dust. But they did not stop. They were going somewhere. Eliza was here. She was a woman alone, which the land itself seemed to consider an imbalance, something to be tested. Miles away, hidden in a fold of the caprock, Tahan watched the land breathe. He saw the wind move the grass, watched a hawk trace a circle over the ranch house, and noted the thin column of smoke from the chimney. Tahan was Commanche. He had once scouted for trade caravans, a bitter duty to earn goods for his people. But that time was past. Now, he scouted only for his community, observing the movements of the new world that was pressing in. He watched to report. He watched to avoid useless trouble. He carried a scar on his left shoulder, a puckered silver map of an ambush near the Cimarron. The scar was a reminder that trouble was seldom avoidable for long. That trouble had a new name, carried on that same intrusive wind. Blackthorn Mining. The name was spoken in the sutler's store, in the saloon, and in the quiet prayers at Reverend Pike's church. Silver, the rumor said, a mountain of it, waiting to be torn from the earth. And the rumor always finished the same way the Blackthorn Company had the county judge in its pocket. The land was already being carved up on paper, and the claims of small ranchers and the ancient rights of the Commanche were just grit in the gears. Eliza was sweeping the porch, a useless, defiant act against the dust. When she saw the rock, it sat by her water barrel, a place it had not been at sunrise. Tied to it with rawhide was a piece of folded paper. Her stomach went cold. The wind stopped. The silence was louder than the gale had been. She untied the paper. The words were crude, written in charcoal, sell or burn. Eliza's hand flew to her throat. It was not just the threat. It was the handwriting, the way the B was formed, leaning backward, the way the R had a long, cruel tail. She had seen it before. It was the same hand that had written a short, polite note of condolence she found tucked in her husband Samuel's coat pocket, days after the fire at Willow Creek had claimed him, a fire that had been ruled an accident. A different kind of watcher, Tahan, saw movement that did not belong, not the wind, not the hawk, wolves, a small pack, gray ghosts in the gray light, cutting across the flat. They were not just running, they were hunting. He saw what they hunted, a small figure on a tired pony, driving a few stray cattle, a boy. Tahan moved. He did not think. He flowed down from the rocks, his own horse moving with the silent, fluid gait of a predator. He made no sound until he was upon them. He gave one sharp, guttural cry that split the air, a sound that spoke of things older than rifles. The wolves, startled, scattered from this new, more dangerous threat. Tahan cut his horse between them and the boy, whose eyes were wide with terror. The boy, Luis, was Mexican, barely 12, working for a ranch larger and poorer than the one belonging to Eliza. Tahan slowed. He made a calming sign with his hand. He spoke a few words of Spanish. Just enough. Agua, casa, safe. He led the boy's trembling pony toward the only smoke he had seen, the ranch of Eliza Hart. Eliza saw them coming from a long way off. Her rifle was in her hands when they arrived. Though she did not raise it, she saw the boy, saw his state. She saw the man who brought him. He was Commanche. She knew the markings, the set of his features, the way he sat his horse as if he were part of it. All she had ever heard of the Commanche were stories told by soldiers and fearful settlers, stories of violence and fire. Tahan stopped 20 yards from the porch. He held his hands open, away from the knife at his belt or the bow on his back. He gestured to the boy, then pointed back to the plains and made a shape with his hands, low to the ground, snapping his fingers together to make the sign for wolf. Eliza nodded. The distance between them was more than yards. It was a canyon of language, of culture, of fear. But she saw the boy. She saw the man had saved him. This was a fact the wind could not blow away. "Bring him inside," she said, knowing the man might not understand her words, but hoping he would understand the gesture as she opened her door. Tahan dismounted. He helped the boy down and gently pushed him toward the house. Eliza met Luis on the steps, guiding him into the warmth. She turned back. Tahan had not moved. He stood by his horse, watching, vigilant. She went to the water barrel, filled a dipper, and walked it out to him. It was a gesture of truce, of thanks. He watched her approach. His eyes were dark and missed nothing. He took the dipper. His fingers brushed hers. It was an accident, a touch as brief and dry as the dust. He drank. He handed the dipper back. "Gracias," he said, a borrowed word. "You are welcome," she replied. He nodded, a sharp, formal movement. Before she could say more, he was on his horse. He looked once more at the house, a long, assessing look, and then turned his horse and rode away. He did not fade. He simply was there, and then he was gone, absorbed back into the brown land. Inside, Eliza gave Luis warm broth. The boy's fear was breaking, and he began to cry quietly. Eliza did not know what to do. She patted his shoulder, a stiff, awkward gesture. She looked out the window. She had expected to see Tahan disappearing into the distance, but he was still there, on a low rise, watching. Not her. He was watching the land around her ranch, his head turning in a slow, careful arc. And then she saw Luis stiffen. The boy had seen him too, but Luis was not afraid. The boy went to the door and waved. Tahan raised a hand, a clear, simple acknowledgement. Elisa watched the man on the rise. He was a protector. The rumors she had heard, the campfire stories of savage men, they did not fit the man who had brought a lost boy home. They did not fit the quiet courtesy of his nod or the care in his eyes as he watched over the small house. That night, long after Luis was asleep by the fire, Eliza sat at her table. The threatening note was laid flat, the rock that carried it holding it down. Sell or burn. The sameness of the handwriting was a sickness in her stomach. Samuel had died at Willow Creek, an accidental fire. The deputy, Ephraim Cole, had ruled it. Cole, who was now seen drinking often with the Blackthorn survey crews. Eliza rose. She went to the cold hearth, pulled loose a stone, and retrieved a small, locked wooden box. The key was on a chain around her neck. Inside, under her marriage lines, was a heavy leather ledger, the bookkeeping of her husband. Samuel had not been a good bookkeeper. The pages were a mess of numbers and notes. But one page, near the back, was neat. It was dated a week before the Willow Creek fire. It detailed a payment, a large one. The words next to it were insurance, fire, and below that, a name. Not in the same charcoal, but in the same leaning, backward script, per Blackthorn agreement. He had not been buying insurance. He had been paying for it. Eliza closed the book. The house was silent save for the wind and the soft breathing of the boy. She was isolated. The law in town, represented by Ephraim Cole, was not her law. The church, led by Reverend Pike, spoke of salvation but seemed more concerned with the collection plate and staying on the good side of powerful men. The only person who seemed to see the land as something other than a thing to be bought or broken was May O'Rourke, the blacksmith, a woman whose opinion was as sharp and loud as her hammer on steel. And May was just one woman. Eliza looked at the note. She looked at the ledger. The fire that killed Samuel was not an accident, and it was coming for her. She thought of the man on the ridge, the gentleness he had shown the boy, the hard set of his shoulders, the scar. He was a man who knew about fighting. She felt a cold resolve settle over her. Samuel had made a deal with shadows, and those shadows had consumed him. He had left her this legacy of ash and fear. She would not run from it. She would not sell. If the fire comes again, she whispered into the cold room, a vow made to herself. I will choose to stand in the light. The wind was the accomplice. It had howled all day, a high, thin scream from the north that dried the wood of the granary until it was tinder. The air was electric with malice. Eliza Hart was asleep, the threatening note on her table, a weight on her mind even in dreams. Luis, the boy Tahan had rescued, was asleep on a pallet near the hearth, the safest place in the small house. The smell woke her first. It was not the clean scent of her stove wood. It was acrid, oily. Kerosene? Then she saw the light. An orange, hungry light danced against her window, casting frantic shadows in the room. She was out of bed in an instant. She grabbed the rifle. She looked at Luis, still asleep. She shook him awake. Get under the bed, she commanded, her voice low and urgent. Do not move. Do not make a sound until I return. The boy, his eyes wide with terror, scrambled under the heavy bed frame. Eliza pulled the door open. The heat struck her face like a physical blow. The granary, her entire store of winter oats for the horses, and more importantly, the precious seed corn for the spring planting, was a roaring column of flame. She saw them then. 4, maybe 5 riders, their faces masked by dark scarves. They were sitting on their horses just beyond the reach of the light, watching it burn. One of them was laughing, a high, cruel sound that cut through the roar of the fire. Another man, holding a torch, wheeled his horse and threw it toward the stable. It landed short, but the dry grass nearby caught instantly. Eliza raised the rifle to her shoulder. She aimed high, over their heads, and fired. The sound of the shot was flat, almost weak against the rush of the inferno. But it had the desired effect. The laughter stopped. The men did not expect resistance. One of them shouted, and they scattered, melting back into the darkness toward the Santa Fe Trail. Eliza ran to the stable. The horses inside were kicking the stalls, screaming in terror. The grass fire was moving fast, fanned by the terrible wind. She was alone. She had only one bucket and a long way to the well. It was useless. She would lose everything. Suddenly, a second figure was there, riding in hard on a panting mule. It was May O'Rourke. The blacksmith must have seen the pillar of smoke from her smithy on the edge of town. May carried 2 buckets on her arms, and her face was a mask of grim determination. We need a fire break, May yelled over the wind, already dumping her water on the nearest patch of burning grass. Before Eliza could answer, a third rider appeared. He came from the darkness of the prairie, not the town, his horse moving like a shadow. Tahan. He must have been watching. He saw the smoke, the wrong kind of smoke, and rode toward it, ignoring the invisible lines of truce and the risk of being seen. He saw an imbalance, a fight that was not fair. He wasted no time on words. He vaulted from his horse, grabbed the splitting axe from the woodpile, and ran not to the granary, which was already lost, but straight to the stable. He kicked the stable door open. The panicked horses shied from him. Eliza and May abandoned the grass fire and ran to help. Tahan moved with a focused, terrifying calm. He cut the lead ropes with his knife, slapped the rumps of the horses hard. Driving them out of the stable and into the darkness of the prairie, they ran, free and safe from the light. The seed corn, Eliza cried out, her voice breaking. My spring corn, it is all in there. The roof of the granary was groaning, ready to collapse. Tahan looked at her, his face lit by the orange flames. He looked at the burning building. Without a word, he ran to the water trough, snatched a heavy horse blanket, and submerged it. Do not, Eliza shouted. It is too late. He ignored her. He threw the soaking blanket over his head and shoulders and vanished into the doorway of the inferno. May grabbed the arm of Eliza. "We saved the house." The two women worked with a desperate fury. They beat at the flames, licking at the porch with their own wet blankets. The fire fought back, spitting embers at them. It felt like hours. Slowly, the roar of the main fire lessened. The granary walls began to fall inward. Then, as they were catching their breath, Tahan stumbled out of the smoke. He was coughing, a deep, racking sound, and his hair was singed. He collapsed to his knees and dropped a heavy burlap sack on the ground, far from the heat. He pulled the smoking blanket off his head. The seed corn. He managed to say, the best of it. He leaned against the water trough, breathing in great, ragged gasps. The blanket he had dropped was already burning. They stood there, the three of them, bound by smoke and exhaustion. May O'Rourke, Eliza Hart, and Tahan. The granary was gone, a black, smoldering hole in the ground. But the horses were safe, the house was safe, and the future, contained in that single heavy sack, was safe. Dawn came, gray and cold. The ruin of the granary exhaled a lazy, sour smoke. Eliza walked the perimeter, her boots sinking into the wet ash. Luis was on the rise, trying to spot the scattered horses. May had ridden back to town for coffee and supplies. Eliza found the boot print near the water trough, where one of the men must have waited while the others set the fire. It was pressed deep into the damp earth, preserved. It was a clear print, a worn heel, and in the center of that heel, a small metal cleat. It was shaped like a cross. Eliza's blood went cold. She had seen that mark before. Ephraim Cole, the deputy. He wore custom boots, was proud of them, and often left that exact, arrogant mark in the dust of the saloon floor. A wagon rattled up the trail. It was Reverend Pike. He clutched his worn Bible to his chest. "Sister Hart," he called out, his voice thick with a sympathy that sounded rehearsed. "A tragedy. A terrible, terrible tragedy." Eliza stood and watched him, her face stiff from smoke and grief. She said nothing. He climbed down from his wagon, careful to keep his boots clean of the soot. He looked at the smoking ruin and shook his head. "This land is hard. Child, too hard for a woman alone. Perhaps this is a sign from Providence." "A sign?" Reverend Eliza asked. Her voice was flat, hollow. "A sign to unburden yourself," he said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I happen to know a buyer, a representative of the Blackthorn Mining Company. He is prepared to offer a most charitable sum for this land, to take this great burden from your shoulders." "A charitable sum," Eliza repeated. "Yes, a fair price. Considering the circumstances, you could move to town. Be safe." He smiled, a thin, tight gesture. "Was it you?" she asked. The Reverend blinked. "Was it I what, dear child?" "Who left the note on my porch, the one that told me to sell or burn." The sympathy on the face of Reverend Pike vanished. It was gone so fast it was as if it had never been. His expression hardened into a cold righteousness. "I am a man of God. Madam, I do not traffic in such things. I traffic in salvation, and I am offering you a path to safety. You would be wise to take it. Good day." He did not wait for an answer. He climbed back onto his wagon seat. He looked at the smoking ruin one last time. The offer will not stand forever. Eliza watched him go. He was the messenger. She was as sure of it as she was of the sunrise. Tahan had not gone far. He was on the low rise, watching. When the wagon of the Reverend was a small dot on the trail, he rode down. May returned at almost the same time, her wagon loaded not with coffee, but with charred lumber from her own yard. "We can rebuild," she said, her voice rough, smaller, stronger. Tahan dismounted. He walked to the ruin, kicking at the embers. He looked at Eliza. "Blackthorn," he said. It was one of the few English words he used with certainty. Eliza nodded. May sighed, pushing her hat back. "The rumors are true. Then the surveyors are coming this week. Word from the saloon is they have papers from the judge. Seizure papers. Eminent domain. They're calling it legal theft. Tahan was not listening. He was looking past the house, toward the thin line of cottonwoods that marked the only reliable water for miles. The creek. Water, he said. Eliza looked at him. What about the water? He knelt. He used his finger to draw in the dirt. He drew the winding line of the creek. He drew a small square for her ranch. Then, farther up, he drew a larger box. Blackthorn. Then, he drew a new, straight line, diverting the creek away from her land, away from the valley, toward the box. They want the creek, Eliza said, the realization hitting her like a physical sickness. Tahan nodded. He pointed to his chest. My people, he said. Then he pointed to her house. You, no water. This was bigger than her land. This was bigger than the fire. They were going to steal the water. May swore. A long, colorful string of words that made Eliza almost smile. They mean to dry us all out. Kill the valley. Eliza made a decision. Wait here. She went inside the house. She came back with a small wooden box. She unlocked it. She took out the heavy leather ledger. She looked at Tahan, then at May. This is why. She opened the book to the page near the back. She explained the entry, the date, just before the fire at Willow Creek, the payment, the words, insurance, fire, and the name, Blackthorn. May stared. Samuel, I never trusted that man. He was always looking for the easy angle. Eliza flinched, but she did not argue. May was not wrong. Tahan looked at the book. He did not understand the letters, but he understood the gravity in her voice. He understood the connection. He pointed to the smoking ruin, then to the book, fire. What do we do with this? May asked, tapping the ledger. The law, Eliza said, but her voice faltered. Ephraim Cole is the law. She pointed to the boot print, now hardening in the sun. The fort, May suggested. The soldiers. Tahan spoke then, his voice low and hard. Soldiers. He touched the old scar on his shoulder. The soldiers at the fort, he said, his English broken but clear. They see my people. They shoot. They see your paper. They burn it. They are not justice. They are just a different kind of blackthorn. Eliza looked at him. He was right. The army protected the trail, but they enforced a peace that was hostile to the Commanche. Handing them the book might do nothing. It might get Tahan arrested or worse. So we keep it, Eliza said. We find another way. Tahan was looking at her. He shifted, and a grimace of pain crossed his face. You are hurt, Eliza said, from the fire. He tried to wave it off. It is nothing. May pointed. Nothing. My foot. The shirt is sticking to you. The sleeve of Tahan was dark and stiff, where an ember had burned through. Eliza went inside. She returned with a bowl of clean water, a small piece of lye soap, and a strip of clean linen. Sit, she commanded, pointing to a stool. He hesitated. It was a line. To accept this kind of help, to show weakness, was not his way. Sit, May echoed, pushing the stool toward him. Before you get the rot. Tahan sat. He pulled the burned shirt away from his skin with a sharp intake of breath. The wound on his shoulder was angry, red and blistered. It was near the old, puckered scar. Eliza knelt beside him. She was gentle. She dipped the cloth in the water and began to wash the soot and ash from the wound. He was rigid, his muscles tight as fence wire. She worked quietly, the only sounds the wind and the soft splash of water. It was intimate, this care. It was a space smaller than the vast distance between their cultures. It was just a woman, a man, and a wound. She finished cleaning it. She wrapped the clean linen around his shoulder, her fingers brushing the skin of his neck. He did not pull away. He looked at her. His eyes held a new light. Not just assessment, trust. The surveyors will come, May said, breaking the silence. They will have papers. We have one boot print and a book they will say is a lie. "We need more," Eliza said. Tahan stood. He tested the bandage, moving his arm. He nodded, a sharp sign of approval. "They changed the water," he said. Eliza looked at him, understanding. The plan, the diversion of the creek. "They will have maps," she said. "Plans." Tahan looked toward the town. Blackthorn. They needed proof. Proof that the company, the judge, and the fire were all one thing. "It is not just my land," Eliza said, looking at the two of them. "It is the water," Tahan affirmed. "It is the law," May added, spitting on the ground. "The real kind. Not the kind of coal." Eliza looked at Tahan. She held out her hand. It was not for a handshake. It was an open palm. "We protect the water," she said. Tahan looked at her hand. He did not take it. Instead, he placed his own hand over his chest, then extended it, palm flat, toward the creek. "Protect the water," he agreed. He then looked at the ledger she still held, and the truth. A partnership was formed, forged in ash, bound by a common threat. The widow, the blacksmith, and the warrior. They stood in the ruin of the granary, the cold wind blowing around them, and for the first time, Eliza Hart did not feel alone. The town of Fort Davis was not much more than a single street of false-fronted buildings, a collection of hopeful lumber and stubborn dust, but it was the center of the world for the Blackthorn Mining Company. They arrived not in a dusty wagon, but in a polished black carriage that looked obscene against the brown landscape. Silas Blackthorn stepped out first. He was a man who wore a dark wool suit in the high desert, a man whose expensive boots had never known mud. His face was clean-shaven and pale, and his eyes were the color of a winter sky. He was followed by his lawyer, Vernon Hale, who was thin as a rail, carrying a leather briefcase that seemed to contain all the authority in the world. May O'Rourke saw them first. She was at the smithy, her hammer silent for a moment as she watched them step onto the boardwalk. Eliza was in town, buying the meager supplies she could afford to replace. She stood by the general store, watching too. The whole street went quiet. Vernon Hale, with a thin smile, took a thick sheaf of papers from his case and nailed it to the wall outside the deputy's office. The heading was large. "By order of the Territorial Court, for the public good." Eminent domain. The words were legal, clean. The meaning was dirty. It meant the land of Eliza Hart, the grazing rights of other small ranchers, and the valley that held the creek were now forfeit to the progress of Blackthorn mining. The townspeople read it. They looked at one another, then looked away. This was the doing of the judge. This was law. There was nothing to be done. Ephraim Cole stepped out of his office, his cross-cleat boots making a sharp, confident sound. He smiled at Silas Blackthorn. "Right on time, sir. Welcome to our quiet little town." Let us hope it remains quiet, Deputy," Blackthorn said, his voice as flat as his eyes. Cole knew he needed to assert the new authority, to curdle the quiet resentment into fear. He scanned the street. He saw Miguel, a young Mexican shepherd who worked for a small outfit south of the town. Miguel was tying a sack of grain to his mule. "You!" Cole shouted, pointing. "Come here!" Miguel froze. He was young, barely a man. He walked forward, his hat in his hands. "What is your business in this town, boy?" Cole asked, his hand on his gun. "I buy grain, senor," Miguel said, his voice trembling. "Vagrancy." Cole snapped. "This town has laws against it. You are under arrest." Cole grabbed the young man, spun him around, and clamped iron cuffs on his wrists. It was a performance for the street, for Silas Blackthorn. It was a show of power. "He has done nothing," a voice boomed. May O'Rourke walked from her smithy. She was wiping soot from her hands onto her leather apron. Her face was dark with a righteous fury. "This is none of your business, blacksmith," Cole sneered. "The hell it is not," May said. You are arresting a man for buying grain. Let him go. I am the law here. May, you would do well to remember that." Cole gave Miguel a shove toward the jail cell. May O'Rourke moved faster than a man of the size of Cole would have expected. She did not grab the deputy. She grabbed her hammer from her belt. In one smooth, powerful motion, she brought the hammer down on the chain connecting the iron cuffs. The link shattered. "Run!" she told Miguel. The boy, stunned, looked at Cole, then at May. He did not need to be told twice. He ran to his mule and was gone in a cloud of dust. Ephraim Cole turned, his face purple. He drew his pistol and aimed it at the chest of May. "You just assaulted an officer. You just aided a fugitive." May raised her hammer. It was heavy, dark, and stained with the fire of the forge. "And you are a coward. Ephraim Cole. You are a bully who wears a badge to protect thieves." The street was breathless. Blackthorne and his lawyer watched with cold interest. Cole looked at the hammer. He looked at the dozen faces watching him. He could not shoot the blacksmith. Not like this. It would be murder, and the public good required a cleaner sort of theft. He lowered his gun, his hands shaking with rage. "You will hang for this. May, I will see it." "You will have to arrest me first," May said, "and you will have to be quicker than you are." Cole said nothing. He turned and stormed back into his office, the jingle of his spurs the only sound. The victory was short-lived. Cole was humiliated, and a humiliated man with a badge is a rabid dog. He needed a target. He could not take May, and he could not yet move on Eliza, so he chose the one man who connected them. By noon, the story was all over town. A prize horse from the Blackthorne stables was missing, stolen, and Ephraim Cole had a witness, a drunk from the saloon, who swore he saw a Commanche warrior riding it hard toward the caprock. "Horse thief," the word went out. "Tahan." Cole raised a posse, $10 in silver. He announced from the steps of the jail, "To the man who brings in the Indian, dead or alive." Luis, the boy Tahan had saved, heard the men gathering. He heard the name. He did not wait. He ran from the town, cutting across the prairie, pushing himself until his lungs burned. He ran to the only place he knew was safe. Eliza was in the ruins of her granary when Luis arrived. He collapsed at her feet, gasping for breath. "They are hunting him, Senora! They are hunting Tahan! They say he is a thief!" Eliza's heart hammered. A lie. Another lie. Like the fire. Like the public good. She pulled Luis to his feet and gave him water. "Where?" "Cole, the posse. They are riding north, toward the breaks." Eliza looked north. She saw the dust, a large group, but then she saw another, smaller trail of dust. A single rider, moving fast, angling away from the posse but toward her ranch. It was Tahan. He was not running. He was observing, leading them, trying to pull them away from the lands of his people. He did not know they were also riding for her. She saw the posse split. Cole was smarter than she gave him credit for. He sent half his men into the breaks, but he and 3 others were cutting across the flat, straight toward her ranch, to trap the rider between them. Tahan saw it too. He was caught. Eliza did not think. She acted. She ran to the stable, the one Tahan and May had saved. She threw the door open. Luis followed, his eyes wide. Tahan saw her wave, a frantic, desperate gesture. "Come here." He was a warrior of the plains. A building was a trap. To be cornered inside walls was death. He hesitated, his horse dancing with uncertainty. "Tahan, in here, trust me quickly," she yelled. He looked at the approaching dust of Cole. He looked at the small woman by the stable. He looked at the new bandage on his shoulder, the clean linen she had tied. He made his choice. He rode his horse straight into the dim light of the stable. "Luis, the door," Eliza commanded. She grabbed Tahan's horse by the bridle. "In the back, the old tack stall." She pushed the horse and rider into the shadows. She pulled a heavy canvas wagon cover over the front of the stall. "Be silent," she whispered. "No matter what you hear." She was scattering oats for her own mare, her hands shaking so hard she spilled them, when Ephraim Cole and his men thundered into the yard. "Widow Hart," Cole called out. He did not dismount. Eliza stepped out of the stable, a pitchfork in her hand. "Deputy!" "We are hunting a thief," Cole said. His eyes scanned the yard, the house, the stable. "A Commanche. He came this way." "I have been busy," Eliza said, her voice tight, "clearing the mess your friends made." Cole's face darkened. "You are harboring a fugitive, Eliza. That is a serious crime." "I am protecting my property, Ephraim, something you have failed to do." "I have seen no one." "He is your friend, is he not?" Cole sneered. "The one you were seen with, the one who probably set your fire to scare you into his arms." The accusation was so vile it steadied her. Her fear turned to cold rock. "You are speaking filth, Ephraim, and you are trespassing. You have no warrant." "I have a posse," he said, gesturing to the men. "I am the warrant." "You are a coward," she said, her voice low and clear. "You set my fire. I can prove it." Cole stiffened. "What did you say?" "I found the boot print, the one with the cross cleat, right by the trough, your boot print." Cole's face went white, then red. He swung down from his horse. He walked toward her until they were inches apart. "You are lying." "Am I?" Eliza raised the pitchfork, its tines aimed at his chest. "I am a widow alone, but I am not weak, and I am not stupid. Get off my land." Inside the stall, Tahan held his knife. He heard the man's voice. He heard the threat. He heard the brave, foolish, impossible defiance of the woman. He was ready to move, to fight his way out. Cole stared into her eyes. He saw no fear. He saw only certainty. He did not know if she was bluffing, but he knew, in that instant, that she was dangerous. Silas Blackthorne wanted the land, not a war with a widow that the whole territory would hear about. He needed this quiet. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You have sand. Eliza, I will give you that, but sand runs out." He turned. "He is not here. Let us ride. We will find him in the breaks." He mounted his horse, gave her one last look of pure hatred, and led his men away at a gallop. Eliza stood, frozen, until their dust was gone. Her knees buckled. She leaned on the pitchfork to stay upright, her breath coming in sobs. The stable door creaked. Tahan emerged, leading his horse. He stood in front of her. He had heard everything. The accusation of the fire, the lie about the boot print. He had heard her choose him over the law, over her own safety. He did not speak. He reached out, not to touch her, but to steady the pitchfork she was trembling against. It was a gesture of solidarity. He was no longer just an ally. He was her partner. Later, when the adrenaline had faded, they sifted through the wreckage of the granary. Eliza was looking for anything else, anything Cole had missed. She found a length of hemp rope, burned at one end. It smelled foul, not just of kerosene. It was a sharp, biting scent of pine. "What is this?" she asked. Tahan took it. He smelled it, his nostrils flaring. He had smelled this before, in raids by soldiers, in deliberate burnings. "Pine oil," he said. "Poison pine. It makes fire fast, hot. It sticks to wood. It cannot be put out." Eliza grabbed the rope. Her hands went numb. "Willow Creek," she whispered, her eyes wide with a terrible, dawning horror. After the fire, the smell, it was this exact smell. It was not just the handwriting on the note. It was the method. The same men, the same fire. Her husband had not died in an accident. He had been murdered by his partners. As this new reality settled over them, Tahan stiffened. He pointed. "Wagon!" Eliza looked. A single wagon was leaving town, moving east. Reverend Pike. He was not heading to any of his congregation. He was heading toward the dark line of mesas where the Blackthorn camp was pitched. "Follow," Tahan said. They took his horse, Eliza riding behind him. They moved like ghosts through the arroyos, staying low, until they were on a rise overlooking the camp. They saw the meeting. Reverend Pike, his hat in his hands, bowing and talking to Silas Blackthorn. They were too far to hear, but the body language was clear. Pike was arguing. Blackthorn was impatient. Finally. Blackthorn took a small bag from his coat and tossed it to the ground. Pike snatched it up, bowed again, and scurried back to his wagon. "The preacher is a paid man," Eliza said, her voice flat and dead. Tahan nodded. He turned his horse and, without a word, began to climb. He led her up a narrow game trail to the very top of the cap rock, a flat stone overlook that felt like the roof of the world. From here, they could see everything: the small brown square of her ranch, the thin line of the creek, a ribbon of life, the dark, sprawling scar of the Blackthorn camp. "This is the watching place," Tahan said, his voice quiet. "My grandfather watched the buffalo from here. My father watched the wagon trains. I watch all of this." He gestured to the valley. "This is the place our worlds touch, the water." Eliza stood beside him, the wind pulling at her hair. She understood. This was not about her small patch of land. It was about the water. The water was life, for her, for the town, for his people. "They will not stop until they have it all," she said. "Then we must find the proof." Tahan said, "The map, the plan to turn the creek." "It will be in that camp," Eliza said, "or in the lawyer's office." "We need more than the map," Eliza said, her mind racing, connecting the pieces. May was right. "We have to show everyone. The boot print, the pine oil, the ledger of my husband, the preacher." "We need to make the truth public," she said, looking at him. Tahan nodded, a grim understanding passing between them. "We need papers. We need witnesses." Eliza looked at the vast, dangerous land below. "And we need to survive." The small group was forged in the cold morning light, their purpose as hard as the iron of the tools of May. There was Eliza, her grief now cooled into a blade. There was Tahan, his duty to his people now bound to her fight. There was May O'Rourke, who saw injustice and felt the same heat as her forge. And there was Luis, the boy, who had seen the kindness of Tahan and the courage of Eliza, and who would not leave their side. They needed one more. They found him at the livery, mending a harness. Old Jedediah. Jed was the mail carrier, a man who had spent 40 years riding the trails, his skin baked to leather, his eyes holding the memory of every dry wash and high mesa. Eliza approached him. She did not ask for help. She stated the facts. Blackthorn was stealing the water. The judge was bought. Cole was a hired gun. Jed did not stop his work. He just spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. He told them Blackthorn had tried to pay him to lose the mail for certain ranchers, the ones who held land near the creek. He told them he had refused. He told them he was old, but he was not yet dead, and he would not watch thieves poison a valley. He was in... The plan was born of necessity. Jed told them the market fair was in 2 nights. The whole town would be on the street. Miners would come in from the hills. Soldiers would be drinking. It was a night for noise and distraction. Blackthorn and his lawyer, Hale, would be holding court in the saloon, buying drinks, solidifying their power. Ephraim Cole would be on the street, his chest puffed out, enjoying the show. The Blackthorn Company had taken over the old freight warehouse by the depot. That was where the maps would be, the contracts, the proof. Tahan would lead. He knew the shadows. He had scouted the town 100 times. May and Eliza would go with him. Luis would be their eyes. He was just a boy. No one would notice him. He would stay in the main street, and if Cole or his men moved toward the warehouse, Luis would whistle the tune of a meadowlark, a sound that did not belong in the noisy night. The night of the market fair arrived. A large bonfire burned in the center of the street. A fiddle sawed out a frantic tune. Men were laughing too loudly. The air smelled of whiskey and roasting meat and nervous energy. Silas Blackthorne was indeed in the saloon, visible through the window, a glass in his hand, a picture of civilized control. Ephraim Cole was on the boardwalk, his cross-cleat boots loud, his thumbs hooked in his belt. The signal came. Luis, selling stray bits of firewood, walked past the alley and began to whistle, a clear, high sound. He was in place. Tahan, Eliza, and May moved. They did not use the street. They went behind the buildings, through the narrow spaces where the night was total. Tahan moved not like a man, but like the wind, his feet making no sound on the hard-packed dirt. He led them to the back of the warehouse. He pointed. A window, high up, meant for loading hay. The lock was new. Tahan did not bother with it. He studied the frame. He used the tip of his knife, not as a pry bar, but as a probe, feeling the wood, the pins. He found the weakness. He pushed. A specific, careful pressure. The lock mechanism, poorly installed, popped free. He boosted May up first. She was strong and scrambled in. Then Eliza. Tahan followed in a movement so fluid he seemed to pour through the opening. Inside, it was dark. The air was still. It smelled of new pine lumber, canvas, and the faint, acidic scent of ink. Moonlight from the high window cut one pale stripe across the floor. They searched. May went for the large crates, hoping for manifests. Eliza and Tahan went to the desk in the corner, the one belonging to Vernon Hale. Papers, stacks of them, legal forms, contracts, letters. Eliza scanned them, her hands moving with speed. She found claims, all marked with the judge's signature. Tahan, his eyes better in the dark, pointed to a long tin tube. Eliza opened it. She unrolled the contents on the desk. It was the map. It was a surveyor's drawing, precise and cold. It showed the creek. It showed her land, marked as Parcel A, and it showed the new straight line, a deep ditch, a flume. It was marked Blackthorne Waterway. It diverted the entire flow of the creek, bypassing the valley, sending it straight to the mountain where the silver mine was rumored to be. Eliza felt sick. It was real. As she rolled the map, her hand brushed another book, a small payments ledger. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the entries. Payments for feed, for whiskey, for lumber. Then, one entry stopped her. The name was Ephraim Cole. The amount was large, $50 in silver. The note beside it, in the sharp handwriting of Vernon Hale, read for ancillary services, fire and clearing. Eliza grabbed the ledger. She and Tahan looked at each other in the dim light. This was it. This was the wire that connected the badge to the fire. Suddenly, from the street, came the sound of a meadowlark. Sharp, urgent, 2 notes, trouble. The warehouse door rattled. A key was in the lock. Tahan pointed. The back wall. A low door, bolted from the inside. May threw her weight against the bar, lifting it. Tahan pulled the door open. It led to the field behind the town, the place known as the wagon graveyard. The main door opened. A man stood silhouetted, a lantern in his hand, a hired guard. Drunk. Come back for another bottle. He saw May, a large shadow moving. He raised his lantern and his rifle at the same time. He fumbled, shouting. Tahan was already moving toward him, a silent darkness. But Eliza was closer. She had her pistol. She did not aim at the man. She aimed at the heavy tin sign advertising wagon axles, nailed to the wall above his head. She fired. The sound inside the warehouse was a cannon blast. The man screamed, dropping his rifle and the lantern, clutching his head. The lantern shattered, oil spilling, but the flame died. "Run!" May yelled. They burst out into the wagon graveyard. It was a maze of broken wheels, axles, and wagon beds. tilted at crazy angles, casting deep shadows. Shots rang out from the main street. Cole, he had heard the blast.
"Get out of here!"
Cole was roaring.
"Find them!"
Tahan, Eliza, and May split up, dodging between the wreckage. A bullet whined past the ear of Eliza. Another splintered the wheel she was hiding behind. May was trapped. A man, one of the Blackthorn crew, cut her off. He lunged for her. May swung her heavy blacksmith hammer in a low arc, striking the man in the knee. He howled. They ran, converging again at the far end of the field, and disappeared into the darkness of the creek bed. They did not stop until they were miles away, hidden in a grove of cottonwoods, their lungs aching. Eliza still clutched the ledger. Tahan had the map tube. They had won the first fight. They studied the map by the thin light of a new moon. The main plan was clear, but Tahan was frowning. He pointed to symbols marked in the high country, near the springs that fed the creek. They were not surveyor marks. He recognized them. They were symbols of his people. The people, Numanu. They marked sacred places, hidden springs, known only to the Commanche. Blackthorn had found them, or someone had told him. He was not just stealing the creek. He was stealing its sources. Tahan looked at Eliza. His face was grim. He told her there was only one person who could read this part of the map, one person who would know what it meant. He had to take her to Ayoka. Eliza understood the gravity of this. He was offering to take her, a white woman, to the heart of his community. It was a risk for him, a profound show of trust. May would return to town. She would act as if nothing had happened. She would watch Cole. Luis was already home, invisible. Eliza and Tahan rode. They rode away from the trail, into the breaks, into a land that was not on any map of the settlers. Tahan led her through canyons so narrow she could touch both walls. He led her to a place that looked like a dead end, then slipped behind a fall of rock into a hidden valley. It was a small encampment, a few teepees, a herd of horses grazing peacefully. It was quiet. Tahan stopped at the edge of the camp. He told Eliza she must wait. He told her to leave her rifle and her pistol. Eliza unbuckled her gun belt without hesitation. She handed it to him. Her safety was in his hands now. He nodded, a sharp acknowledgement of her trust. He returned with a woman. She was old, her hair gray, her face a beautiful map of deep lines. She wore a dress of soft hide, decorated with simple beadwork. This was Ayoka. She was a healer, a wise woman, a person of great power among his people. The eyes of Ayoka studied Eliza. It was a look that seemed to pass through skin and bone, seeing the doubts and the resolve inside. Ayoka spoke, her voice soft. Tahan translated. She asked why a white woman came to this place. Eliza did not speak of her ranch. She did not speak of her husband. She spoke of the water. She unrolled the map. She pointed. "The water is life," Eliza said, "for all of us. Blackthorn poisons the valley." Ayoka looked at the map. Her finger traced the symbols Tahan had pointed out. A cold anger entered her eyes. She spoke, and Tahan did not need to translate the emotion. She told them Blackthorn was not just diverting the water. He was claiming the springs. He would foul them with his digging. She said the paper from the judge was a curse, a piece of white man magic that made theft legal. She warned Eliza that in the world of the settlers, the paper, once stamped, was more powerful than truth. Eliza stayed in the camp for a day. She watched, she listened, she learned. She pointed to the water, and Ayoka said the word, "Pa." Eliza repeated it. She pointed to Tahan, then to herself. "Haitsi." Tahan said, "Friend." Eliza repeated that, too. "Haitsi." She saw the respect Tahan showed Ayoka. She saw the way he spoke to the children. This was the man they called a savage, a thief. When it was time to leave, Tahan brought the horses. Eliza went to her mare. Tahan was already there. He was finishing a knot on the tail of the horse. It was not the simple knot a warrior used. It was a careful braid, tied off with a small strip of red cloth. It was a settler's knot, a decoration. It was a gesture of impossible, quiet tenderness. He had seen her, not just as an ally, as a woman. They rode back in silence, the space between them filled with this new, fragile understanding. They found May at the smithy, her face dark. Cole was a storm. He had lost the map. He had lost the ledger. He knew he had been robbed. He had raised the bounty on Tahan to $100. He had men riding every trail. Just as the news seemed darkest, old Jed arrived. He was smiling, a rare thing. He carried his mail sack. He told them he had important news. A federal special envoy, a man named Marcus Thorne, was on his way to Fort Davis. He was investigating the territory for corruption, acting on behalf of Washington. Jed knew his schedule. He would arrive in 5 days. He would stay for 2. This was their chance. The county judge was corrupt. Cole was the law. The army was indifferent. But a federal envoy. He was outside the reach of Silas Blackthorne. The plan was clear. They had 5 days, 5 days to survive the rage of Ephraim Cole. 5 days to get their proof, the ledger of Samuel, the receipt for fire services, the stolen map, and the story of the poisoned pine oil into the hands of Marcus Thorne. The race had begun. They did not use the Santa Fe Trail. To use the trail was to be seen. Ephraim Cole had men riding every mile, checking every wagon, looking for the Commanche man now worth $100. Tahan led them cross-country. He led his small band of 4, Eliza, May, old Jed, and the boy Luis, through the high, dry places he knew. He led them through arroyos that were like scars in the earth, and up onto the flat mesas where the wind never stopped. He was taking them on a long, hard circle toward Fort Davis, avoiding the town, aiming for the fort itself. The land was an enemy. The wind was a constant shove, pushing at them, stealing the warmth from their bodies, and drying their lips until they cracked. They rode for 2 days, their world reduced to the plodding of the horses in the vast, uncaring sky. On the 3rd day, the sky turned against them. The wind stopped. The air went still. A heavy, dead silence. The gray clouds turned a sick, greenish black. Tahan stopped. He sniffed the air. He pointed to the south. Shelter. Now. The first stones began to fall. Not rain, ice, small at first, tapping on their hats, then larger, the size of marbles, then the size of acorns. The hailstorm hit them like a volley of rifles. The horses screamed and tried to bolt. The air was filled with a sound like 1,000 windows shattering. Tahan had seen a dark shape on the horizon, an old line shack, built by buffalo hunters and long abandoned. They ran for it. They stumbled inside, pulling the terrified horses in with them. The shack was barely a structure. The roof was half gone, the walls full of gaps. But it was a break against the terrible, violent assault of the ice. They huddled inside, the 5 of them, watching the world turn white. The storm raged for an hour, a relentless, deafening battery. When it finally passed, the sun was gone, night was falling, and the temperature was dropping faster than a stone in a well. The world outside was a field of white ice. The wind returned, now Arctic, finding every crack in the old shack. They were soaked. They were freezing. They built a small, smoky fire with the few pieces of dry wood Tahan could find inside. It was a miserable, desperate flame. It offered light, but little heat. May tended to her own horse, her face grim. Luis curled up near the warmest wall, wrapped in a blanket, and fell into an exhausted sleep. Jed sat with his back to his saddle, chewing on a piece of dried beef, his eyes closed. Eliza sat apart. She was colder than she had ever been. It was a cold that went into her bones. She looked at Tahan. He was watching the doorway, his rifle across his knees, a silent guardian against a night that held more threats than just the temperature. She was tired. She was afraid, and she was deeply, profoundly aware of the man sitting across from her, The cultural divide, the wall between her world and his, felt as real and as cold as the ice outside. She lay down. She pulled her one thin blanket over her. She turned her back to the small fire. She turned her back to him. She faced the wall. The rough planks smelled of old dust and decay. The wind pushed needles of ice through the cracks. She pulled her knees to her chest, shivering, trying to make herself small. It was a barrier. It was a wall she needed. She lay there, shivering. For a long time, the fire crackled, the wind howled. Then she felt a touch. It was not rough, it was gentle, hesitant, on her shoulder. She stiffened. It was Tahan. He was pulling, just enough to get her attention. He did not speak. He just asked her, with that one small gesture, to turn back. Eliza lay frozen. He did not pull harder. He waited. He spoke. His voice was a low rumble, barely louder than the howl of the wind. He asked, his English broken, if it was okay. Just that, okay. She turned, slowly. She looked at him in the dim, flickering light. His face was hard with the cold, but his eyes held no demand. They held nothing but concern. They held the offer of warmth. She nodded. A small movement. Yes. He shifted, moving back from the fire to make room. She moved. She lay down with her back to the same wall he used. He pulled the heavy horse blanket he used, a thick wool, over both of them. They lay side by side, not touching, but the cold was a living thing. It pushed itself between them, seeking their warmth. It was relentless. Tahan moved. He put his arm around her, pulling her back against his chest. It was not the gesture of a lover. It was the gesture of a man shielding a fire. It was the practical, desperate act of two human beings trying to survive a night that was cold enough to kill. He was a solid, warm presence in the frozen dark. He was shielding her from the wind. She let out a breath she had been holding for hours. She leaned back against him. He was life. They lay like that for a long time. The shivering slowly eased. Eliza whispered into the dark. She told him she was afraid. She was afraid of Ephraim Cole. She was afraid of the judge. She was afraid the federal envoy would be just another man who believed in paper and silver. He whispered back. His voice was in her ear, a warm vibration. He told her of a time he was trapped by a blue norther while hunting. He told her he lay inside the carcass of his own horse for 2 days to live. He said the cold was just a thing. It could be beaten. He said fear was a signal to be smart, not to stop. He said they had the truth. The truth was a good weapon. They talked. They whispered about the future, about the water, about what justice looked like. They spoke of small hopes, of the coming spring, of the map they carried. In the cold, dark, abandoned shack, surrounded by ice, their lives changed. They were no longer just allies. They had chosen, in this simple, necessary act of survival, to stand together. Dawn broke, cold and blinding. The world was white. Tahan was the first one out. He moved like a shadow, scanning the new, silent landscape. Eliza came out after him, her body stiff but warm, alive. Tahan knelt. He pointed. In the thin layer of hail, there were tracks, horse tracks, not their own, and they were fresh. The men who made them had passed in the last hour. Someone had followed them. Someone knew where they were. They moved fast. There was no time for food, no time for caution. They were exposed. They rode toward the creek. It was their only cover. The trees, now bare, offered a thin shield. They reached the bank of the frozen creek, and the world exploded. The shots came from the far bank. An ambush. Cole. He had anticipated them. Tahan reacted instantly. He slapped the rump of the pack mule. It was the one carrying their food. Luis, without being told, understood. He yelled and chased the mule, making a show of it, riding perpendicular to the creek, drawing fire. It was a brave act. Bullets kicked up ice around the boy. May and Jed scrambled for cover behind a large, fallen cottonwood. May rested her rifle on the log and began to firing back, a slow, steady, aimed response. Tahan grabbed the arm of Eliza. He pulled her down behind a wall of rock. "We are pinned," May yelled. Tahan looked around. They were 4. Cole had at least 8 men. "I will draw them," Tahan said. He was ready to ride out, to be the target. Eliza grabbed his shirt. "No, not this time." She had seen the man who seemed to be the leader of the second group. He was on a ledge, directing the fire. She rested her rifle on the rock. She took a slow breath. She let it out. She remembered her husband teaching her, years ago. Aim for the center. She aimed for the hat. She squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean. The hat flew from the head of the man. He screamed, clutching his face. Though he was not hit, he tumbled from the ledge. The firing stopped. Just for a second. The surprise was total. "Now," Tahan said. He pushed Eliza toward the horses, but it was too late. Cole's men were using the brake. They were crossing the creek. May fired. A man yelled. But another man grabbed her rifle from behind. May swung with her fist, but he hit her with his pistol. She went down, blood on her temple. It was over in seconds. Jedediah, old Jed, stood his ground. He held his mailbag, a useless shield. Cole rode up, his face a mask of triumph. He saw Tahan, his rifle empty. He saw Eliza, her face pale. "Well," he said, "this is a fine gathering. The thief, the blacksmith, and the widow." He looked at Jed and the mailman. "Grab him," Cole ordered, pointing at Jed. 2 men grabbed the old man. "You cannot do this, Cole," Eliza said. "I am the law," he reminded her. "And I am arresting this man for consorting with a known fugitive." He was taking a hostage. Jed looked at Eliza. His eyes were clear. He knew he was not going to survive this. He had one last delivery to make. He reached into his coat. He pulled out a heavy object. It was brass, with a wooden handle, the official United States postal seal. "Catch!" he yelled. He threw it. It tumbled in the air, a heavy, dark shape against the white ice. Cole lunged for it, but he was too slow. Eliza caught it. Her hand closed around the heavy, cold metal. It was the key. It was the one thing that could make the judge's papers look like a lie. It was the authority of the federal government, small and heavy in her hand. Cole's face turned black with rage. He raised his pistol to shoot Jed. "No!" Tahan shouted. He stepped in front of Eliza, unarmed. Cole smiled. He lowered the gun. He did not need to shoot anyone. Not yet. He had his prize. "We have the old man," he said. "He will tell us what we need to know." He and his men mounted, pulling Jed with them, a rope on his hands. They rode away, disappearing into the breaks. Eliza stood, the heavy seal in her hand. May was stirring, a long cut on her head, but she was alive. Luis rode back, his face white, but unharmed. Tahan walked to where Cole had been. He looked at the tracks. Eliza looked at the heavy brass seal. "He gave his life for this," she whispered. "Not yet," Tahan said. He looked at her, his face grim. "We must go." Tahan bent down. He touched the ground. He felt a deep shame. Because of him. Jed was taken. Because of him. May was hurt. His presence, the bounty on his head, had made the hunt hotter. "I am the target," he said. "This is my fault." Eliza walked to him. She put her hand on his arm. She said his name, Tahan. Then she said the Commanche word he had taught her. Haitsi, friend, companion. "This is not your fault," she said. "This is their fight, and it is our fight. We are going to get him back, and we are going to find more proof. We are going to stop them." Tahan looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. A fire that had nothing to do with burning and everything to do with justice. He stood. He looked at the sky. The clouds were gathering again, thick and dark. "The rain is coming," he said, "a real rain. It would be a blessing. It would melt the ice, but it would also be a curse." "It will wash away the tracks," he said. Eliza clutched the heavy seal. They had a new clock. They had to save Jed before the rain came and erased him from the world. Silas Blackthorne had orchestrated his victory celebration with care. The signing of the final land seizure documents was to be a public event, a performance of progress. He stood on the steps of the county courthouse, a small wooden building that passed for the seat of government, his lawyer, Vernon Hale, at his side. The county judge, a man named Thatcher, looked nervous, his hands fluttering over the thick stack of papers on the podium. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the promise of free whiskey and the gravity of the moment. They were ranchers, miners, and shopkeepers, their faces wary. They stood in the dusty street, squinting in the hard morning light. Reverend Pike stepped forward. He raised his hands, a benevolent smile on his face. "My friends, my neighbors," he began, his voice oily and smooth. "Today, we stand on the threshold of a new era, an era of prosperity, given to us by the grace of Providence, and delivered by the vision of men like Mr. Silas Blackthorne." Eliza Hart stood in the crowd, her bonnet pulled low. She was just another woman, lost in the sea of denim and wool, in the deep pocket of her skirt. Her hand rested on two objects. One was the cold, heavy brass of the postal seal Jedediah had thrown to her. The other was the thin, sharp corner of the Blackthorne ledger. Across the street, on the flat roof of the general store, Tahan lay prone. He was invisible. He watched the crowd. He watched the exits. He watched Ephraim Cole, who stood by the jail, his thumbs hooked in his belt, a cruel smile on his face. Pike continued, his words painting a picture of a golden future. "This is not just a mine. It is a new beginning. It is jobs. It is growth. It is the taming of this wild land, as prescribed by divine will, as if summoned by the speech." Ephraim Cole moved. He walked to the side of the jail and returned, pulling a horse. Old Jedediah was tied to the saddle. The mail carrier was pale, and there was a dark bruise on his cheek, but his eyes were clear and full of a cold fire. "What is this, deputy?" Someone in the crowd called. Cole spat into the dust. "This is a prisoner, a traitor, caught aiding a fugitive murderer." He tied the reins of the horse to the hitching rail, but he used a knot that was meant to slip. "He is desperate, likely to make a run for it. Be warned." The setup was plain. It was a stage. Cole meant to shoot Jed in the back and call it justice. Tahan saw it. Eliza saw it. From the alley beside the smithy, May O'Rourke saw it. Her head was wrapped in a white bandage, but her arms were as strong as ever. She stood beside a large, seemingly innocent pile of coal dust and wood shavings, waste from her forge. She held a lit cigar. Reverend Pike was reaching his conclusion. "And so, with humble hearts, we ask for a blessing on this enterprise. Let us sign." He gestured to the judge. The judge picked up his pen. May dropped the cigar. The pile of coal dust did not explode. It did something more effective. It ignited with a heavy, thick whoosh. A column of greasy, black smoke billowed upward and then rolled outward, thick as night, across the street. The crowd yelled, men choked, horses reared. "Fire!" someone screamed. In that instant of blindness and panic, Luis, the boy, darted from the alley. He was small and fast, a shadow within the smoke. He ran to the horse of Jed. His knife flashed. He cut the slip knot. He cut the rope binding the hands of Jed. He slapped the horse's rump with all his might. "Go, viejo!" The horse lunged, bolting through the confused crowd, Jed clinging to its mane. "He is escaping!" Ephraim Cole roared. Just as he had planned, he raised his rifle to fire at the back of the old man. "No!" The voice cut through the smoke. Eliza Hart pushed her way through the panicking men. She stepped out of the cloud of smoke and stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps. She was no longer hiding. Cole froze, his rifle half raised, his target gone. Eliza held up the Blackthorne ledger. Her voice was not a scream. It was as clear and cold as the ice in the creek. This is not progress. This is theft. The smoke began to clear. The crowd turned, their faces stunned. There was the widow Hart, alone, facing down Blackthorn. "This is the Blackthorn payments ledger," Eliza announced, her voice gaining strength. "Stolen from their own warehouse, and it shows a payment to Ephraim Cole, $50 in silver, for fire services." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Men looked at Cole. Vernon Hale, the lawyer, stepped forward, his composure perfect.
That is a preposterous and slanderous allegation,
he said, his voice cutting and precise. "That ledger, if it is even real, simply details a standard fee for clearing brush and debris from the land claims, a common practice." The crowd murmured. They were confused. It was her word against the lawyers. Silas Blackthorn stared at Eliza, his eyes flat and reptilian. He nodded to the judge. "Sign the papers. Thatcher, end this nonsense." The judge, his face pale and sweaty, picked up the heavy county seal. He looked at the paper. From the roof, Tahan acted. He had tied a length of rope from the belfry of the empty church, stretching it across the street to his position. He pulled. Clang! The sound of the church bell was a shock. It was the sound of alarm. Clang! 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 The bell rang, wild and frantic. Men poured from the saloon, the hotel, the feed store. What is it? Is it an attack? Fire? The small, controlled crowd was now a large, panicked mob.
"Sign it,"
Blackthorn yelled at the judge over the noise.
"Sign it, you fool!"
The judge raised the seal, his hand shaking, ready to bring it down, to make the theft legal.
"Willow Creek."
Eliza's voice was a raw scream that tore through the noise. Everything stopped, even the bell. Eliza pointed a trembling finger at Silas Blackthorn. "He burned Willow Creek, just like he burned my granary. Ask anyone who was there. Ask them about the smell." The crowd understood. This was not an abstract legal argument. "It was poison pine oil," Eliza cried. "It sticks to wood. It cannot be put out. It is the smell of murder." In the back of the crowd, an old rancher, a man named Peters, took off his hat. "She is right," he said, his voice a low rumble. "By God, she is right.
I was there. I smelled it. It was not a grass fire. It was wrong."
The crowd turned. The suspicion was now a living thing. They were no longer a mob. They were a jury. They turned as one, their faces hard, and looked at Silas Blackthorn. Ephraim Cole saw the moment was lost. He saw the hatred in their eyes. He did what a coward always does. He reached for his gun. He raised his pistol. Not at the crowd, but at the source of his trouble. He aimed it straight at the heart of Eliza Hart. A shot cracked the air. It was a boom, louder than the pistol of Cole. Cole cried out, not in pain, but in shock. The heavy wooden sign of the county courthouse above his head exploded, showering him in splinters. He looked up. On the roof, Tahan stood. He was not hiding. He was a figure of judgment against the blue sky, his rifle smoking in his hands. He had fired a warning. He had not killed the deputy. He knew the trap. A dead lawman would turn this into a massacre, an Indian uprising. The truth would be buried with the bodies. He had avoided it, but he had declared his part. "The Indian!" Cole shrieked, his voice breaking. "It is the horse thief! Kill him!" But before any man could raise a rifle, a new sound cut the air. A bugle call, clear and sharp. From the east end of the street, a column of blue-coated soldiers rode in at a trot, their sabers drawn. The garrison patrol from the fort, summoned by the bell and the shot. Tahan saw them. This was not the federal envoy. This was just the army, and the army saw only a riot, an armed Commanche, and chaos. He lowered his rifle. He turned and disappeared over the back of the roof. May O'Rourke was at the side of Eliza. She grabbed her arm, her grip like iron. "We have to go. Now. The soldiers will not ask questions." Eliza was frozen, her eyes locked on the judge. The judge, his face as white as paper. was holding the seal. It was an inch above the unsigned document. "We did not lose," Eliza whispered. She let May pull her. Luis was waiting in the alley. They melted into the chaos. The soldiers formed a line, pushing the angry, confused crowd back. The young lieutenant in charge looked at Blackthorn. He looked at the smoking pile of coal. He looked at the trembling judge.
"What in the name of God is happening here?"
the lieutenant demanded. Silas Blackthorn smoothed his suit. He was furious, his face pale with rage, but the papers were unsigned. The public had seen the truth. The victory was small. It was a tactical retreat, but the war was not over. They had won a day. They rode hard, May swaying in the saddle, her face pale beneath the grime and the dark, clotting line on her temple. Tahan did not speak, his face a mask of stone, pushing them deeper into the breaks, into the secret places. He led them to the hidden valley, the sanctuary of his people. He brought them to the teepee of Ayoka. The old woman emerged, her eyes taking in the scene with a cold, clear light. She saw the blood on May. She saw the exhaustion on Eliza and Luis. She looked at Tahan, and her expression was not one of welcome. She motioned for May to be brought inside. Eliza and Luis helped the blacksmith, settling her on a pile of soft buffalo robes. Ayoka knelt. She motioned for water. She dipped a clean cloth and began to wash the wound, her hands surprisingly gentle, her movements economical and precise. She spoke, her voice low, directed at Tahan, who stood at the entrance, a sentinel of shame. He translated for Eliza, his own voice flat, sparing himself nothing. "She asks why I have brought this. She says I have painted a target on the backs of our people." "Tell her we had no choice," Eliza whispered. "She says there is always a choice." Tahan replied, "She asks why I brought the fire of the settlers into this quiet place. She points to May. She points to you. She asks if I am so eager to fight a white man's war that I will trade the lives of my friends for it." May groaned, her eyes opening. She looked at Ayoka. "Tell her thank you, and tell him this is my fight. I chose it." Ayoka did not need the translation. She understood the tone. She nodded once at May, a gesture of respect, but her hard gaze returned to Tahan. She spoke again, more sharply. Tahan flinched, as if she had struck him. He looked at the old, silvered scar on his shoulder, the one Eliza had bandaged. "What did she say?" Eliza asked. Tahan was silent for a long moment. "She reminded me of this," he said, touching the scar. "She asked if I have forgotten how I earned it." He looked at Eliza, his eyes dark with a memory she could not reach. "I was young, younger than Luis. We were proud. We thought ourselves warriors. We raided a wagon train for horses. It was not for need. It was for noise, for glory. It was a pointless fight. My friend was killed. I was shot. The soldiers came. They followed our trail back, and they attacked a hunting camp that had nothing to do with us. Women, children, it was a nothing fight. A fight for ego. I carry this." He touched the scar. "To remember that stupid pride. To remember that violence calls more violence. That it does not end." He looked at the rifles, at May's wound. "She says I am doing it again. She says I have brought the wolf into the den." He turned and walked away from the teepee, a man defeated not by an enemy, but by his own past. That night, the camp was quiet. May was sleeping, the herbs of Ayoka on her wound. Luis was with the horses, finding a strange comfort in their simple presence. Eliza sat by a small fire, alone. She held the key to her past, the ledger of her husband. She opened it. She was not looking for anything new. She was just holding the proof, the fire service's receipt, the wire that connected Cole to Blackthorn. Her fingers idly turned a page, and she saw it. It was a page near the front, one she had scanned but never read. It was not the neat, sharp script of Vernon Hale. It was the familiar, looping, slightly sloppy handwriting of her husband, Samuel. It was an entry, dated a month before the Willow Creek fire. It was not a payment. It was a list. Agreement with Blackthorn. It listed 3 things. First, a waiver of water rights. Second, access to the south pasture for survey. And third, a single, terrible line. One-time payment for risk insurance. Below it, in the same hand, was a note. They will handle the old mortgage. The fire at Willow Creek will clear the debt, all new. Eliza's breath stopped. The ledger fell from her hands. It was not just that Samuel had known. It was not just that he had been complicit. He had been a partner. The fire that killed him was a fire he had agreed to. He had been planning to start over with her, on land cleared by a criminal act. He had been willing to let the old property burn, to collect the risk insurance, to walk away clean. Only his partners had betrayed him. They had not just burned the property. They had burned him with it. The entire foundation of her fight cracked. She was not avenging a good man. She was cleaning up the mess of a weak one, a man who had made a deal with the monsters. The memory she was trying to protect was a lie. She heard a footstep. It was Tahan. He sat across the fire from her. He saw her face. He saw the open ledger. "What is it?" he asked. She could not speak. She pushed the book toward him with a trembling finger. He could not read the words, but he understood the name. Samuel. She told him. She whispered the words into the night, the poison of them sticking in her throat. He knew. He was part of it. The fire was his idea. Tahan watched her, his expression unreadable. "We cannot use this," Eliza said, her voice frantic. "We cannot show this to the envoy. This is not part of it. It changes nothing about Blackthorn. It is just dirt, my shame." "It is the truth," Tahan said, his voice quiet. "It is not the whole truth," she argued, her voice rising. "It is a private, ugly thing. It will make them doubt everything. They will say it is just a fight between thieves. Samuel is dead. This will kill his memory. His memory is a lie." Tahan said. It was not cruel. It was a fact. "You do not understand." Eliza stood, pacing. "He was my husband. He was lost. He was scared. This does not make him a monster like Blackthorn." "It makes him a man who made a deal," Tahan said, standing to face her. "He wanted the water. He wanted the land. He was willing to use fire. He is no different. The truth, Eliza, all of it, or it is nothing." "No," she cried. "I will not do it. I am fighting for my land. I am fighting for Jed. I am fighting for the water. I am not fighting to tear down my own house, to prove my own husband was a criminal." This was their first true fight. It was a canyon between them, as deep as the one they were hiding in. She was fighting to save a piece of her past. He was fighting for a future that could only be built on a clean, stone foundation of complete truth. He knew what half-truths did. His people had been living on the scraps of settler half-truths for a generation. Before he could answer, Ayoka spoke from the shadow of her teepee. She had been listening. She walked to the fire. She carried a long, thin cord of plaited sinew. She motioned for them to sit. She began to speak. Tahan translated, his voice low, his own anger forgotten, his duty as a bridge taking over. "She tells a story," he said, "of the first people. There was a stream that came from the mountain, and it gave life to everyone. But one man, he was jealous. He did not want to share. He went up the mountain and he put a large rock in the stream. He turned the water. It flowed only to his lodge. His corn grew tall. But everyone else, their fields dried. The animals left. The people grew sick." Ayoka looked at Eliza. "The people came to him. They said, 'You must move the rock.' And the man said, 'I have not taken your water. The stream is dry. It is a thing of the world. It is not my fault.'" He told a half-truth. He did not say he moved the water, only that he did not take it. Ayoka paused. The people grew weak, but one woman, she would not believe it. She walked up the mountain. She followed the dry bed. She found the rock. She saw the man, fat and happy, by his new stolen stream. She came back. She told the people, "The water's not gone. It has been moved." The man lied. The people, now knowing the whole truth, went up the mountain. They were not strong enough to fight the man, but together they were strong enough to move the rock. They turned the water back. It flowed for everyone. The man, his lie broken, was left with nothing but his dry field. Ayoka held up the braided cord. It was made of many thin strands, woven into one strong line. She held it out to Eliza. "She says," Tahan translated, his voice soft, "that your truth is broken. It is in scattered pieces. The ledger of your husband, the receipt from coal, the map, the poison pine, the memory of your husband. They are all just strands. They are weak. You must tie them together. All of them. Even the ugly ones. Even the ones that hurt you. Only when they are all braided." She dropped the cord into the hand of Eliza. "Will it be strong enough to move the rock?" Eliza looked at the braided cord. She looked at the face of Tahan, lit by the fire. She looked at the ledger. She sank to the ground. She had been fighting for a lie. The whole truth. It was the only thing. "You are right," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All of it. We tell all of it." The tension broke. Tahan knelt in front of her. He did not touch her. He just nodded. A new sound. A whistle. "Luis!" He ran into the firelight, his face pale with fear. "Riders!" he panted. "A lot of them. They are at the mouth of the canyon. It is Cole." Tahan was on his feet in an instant. The moment of peace was shattered. Cole had found them. He had led them here. He had brought the wolf to the den. He grabbed his rifle. His choice was clear. He had to lead them away. Into the breaks, become the target, and pull the fight away from the lodges of his people. "No," Eliza said. She stood up, the braided cord clutched in her hand. "This is not your fight, Tahan. It is our fight, and we will not fight it in your home, but we will not run." She was thinking the parable of Ayoka, the strands. "Jed is out there," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "He escaped. He is hiding. Luis, you know the small ways, the coyote trails." "Yes, Senora," the boy said, standing taller. "We have copies," Eliza said, her mind racing. "May, you can write. You can copy the ledger pages. We have the map. We have the postal seal Jed gave me." She laid out the plan. May would copy the key pages of both ledgers. The entry from Samuel. The entry from Cole. Eliza would write a letter to the federal envoy, Marcus Thorne. She would explain the map, the poison pine, the boot print, the whole story. She would stamp it with the federal seal, giving it official weight. "Luis," Eliza said, kneeling to the boy, "you will be the messenger. You must take this packet. You must find Jed. Give it to him. He is the only one who can get it to the envoy. Do you understand?" Luis looked at Tahan. He looked at Eliza. This was not a request for a boy. It was a mission for a man. "I understand," he said, his voice firm. "I will find him." Tahan nodded. "He will. But Cole is at the mouth. You cannot leave." "We will give him a different fight." Eliza said, "We will not fight here. There is a place, the dry canyon, the one with the narrow rocks, to the east. Can we lead them there?" "Yes," Tahan said. "It is a trap. Easy to defend. If you are inside it, hard to escape." "We will not escape," Eliza said. "We will hold them. We will fight them there. We will give Luis the time he needs to get away." Tahan looked at her. He saw the new strength in her, the cold fire. She was no longer a widow. She was a leader. He nodded. "We will fight them there." That night, as May copied the papers by the dim light, and Luis prepared to slip away, Eliza and Tahan stood at the edge of the camp. The sky was turning a sick gray. The rain was coming. "I am sorry," Eliza said. about my husband, about the truth. Do not be sorry for the truth. Tahan said, Be strong for it. He looked at her, his face lit by the moon. He saw her fear and her courage. He saw the woman who had faced him with a dipper of water, who had bandaged his arm, who had hidden him from the law, and who was now willing to tell the worst truth about herself to win a future for everyone. He stepped closer. He placed his hand on her shoulder, his thumb brushing the side of her neck. You are not like him, he said. You are not weak. You are the strongest person I have ever known. Eliza leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for just an instant. She was so tired. She put her hand over his. We will survive this. We will survive this, he agreed. He pulled her into a simple, firm embrace. It was not a kiss. It was a promise. It was two soldiers, two partners, before a battle, affirming their bond. They stood together, holding each other in the darkness. Two small, warm points of life against the cold. And the coming storm. Luis was gone, a ghost in the shadows. The sky in the east began to bleed red, a raw, crimson dawn. And with it, from the mouth of the canyon, came the faint, metallic sound of horses. They were coming. The rock pass was a natural trap. The walls were sheer, rising 100 feet, and the floor was narrow, choked with old rock falls. Tahan had chosen the spot. He was high on the eastern rim, a ghost among the stones. Eliza was with him, her rifle resting on a flat ledge. Below, hidden in a cleft near the entrance, May O'Rourke waited. Her heavy freight wagon was positioned, its wheels chocked, ready to be rolled into the pass to block any retreat. She was not a blacksmith today. She was a soldier. The sound came first, the clatter of iron-shod hooves on stone. Ephraim Cole rode in first, his rifle out. He was followed by Silas Blackthorne, whose pale face was tight with cold fury. And with them, his Bible clutched to his chest, was Reverend Pike. Behind them rode a dozen hired guns, men whose faces were hard and empty. They rode deep into the pass. Cole scanned the high rocks, his eyes suspicious. He knew he was being led. Tahan gave the low, soft call of a canyon wren. May kicked the chocks from the wheels of the wagon. She put her strong shoulder to the heavy wood and shoved. The wagon rolled, slow at first, then faster, its wheels screaming. It crashed into the narrowest part of the pass, wedging itself between the two walls. A perfect barrier. The men in the back yelled, pulling their horses up. They were trapped. At the same instant, Tahan pulled the rope he had laid. A large boulder, balanced precariously, tumbled down. It did not hit anyone. It hit the ground in the middle of the posse, shattering, sending stone shrapnel and panic through the horses. The canyon erupted. Horses screamed and reared. The hired guns were disorganized, firing wildly at the cliffs. Silas Blackthorne, enraged, was trying to control his horse. He had a company flag on a short pole, a symbol of his new ownership. Eliza raised her rifle. She did not aim for a man. She aimed for the rope that held the arrogant flag. She fired. The rope snapped. The heavy flagpole toppled, striking one of the gunmen from his saddle. It was a symbol. The Blackthorne authority was falling. The pass was pure chaos. Tahan and Eliza were firing, their shots echoing, forcing the men to take cover. May, from behind her wagon, was firing her own rifle with deadly, methodical calm. Ephraim Cole was a snake. He did not fight the main battle. He saw where the shot from Eliza had come from, while Tahan was focused on the men below. Cole dismounted. He scrambled up the far side of the pass, silent, staying in the shadows, climbing like an animal. Eliza was reloading. She was watching May. She did not hear him. A heavy arm wrapped around her chest. A hand tore the rifle from her grasp. The cold, round barrel of a pistol was pressed against her temple. "Stop shooting!" Cole's voice was a raw shriek that cut through the gunfire. "Stop, or she dies." Tahan froze. He saw them across the pass. Cole, holding Eliza as a shield, his face twisted in a mask of triumph. Below, the firing stopped. May stood slowly, her rifle lowered. "That is better?" Cole sneered. Dragging Eliza into the open, he looked down at Silas Blackthorne. "She was a lot of trouble," Cole yelled, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Just like her husband, she did not know when to stop." Eliza was trembling, but her voice was cold. "You murdered him. You set the fire at Willow Creek." Cole laughed, a high, ugly sound. "Willow Creek. That was just a job of service. By order, we were just clearing the books for Mr. Blackthorne here. He wanted the land, but his partner got weak. So we cleared the land, and the partner—" He was confessing. He was bragging. He was the man with the gun. "Drop the rifle! Indian!" Cole screamed across the pass at Tahan. "Drop it on the rock, or I will paint this canyon with her." Tahan looked at Eliza. Her eyes met his. He saw the terror, but also the resolve. Slowly, Tahan lowered his rifle. He placed it on the stone in front of him. He stood up, his hands open and away from his body. "See?" Cole taunted, his voice dripping with venom. "Just a savage in the end. All that fight, gone. You are nothing. You are dirt under our boots." He was so focused on Tahan, so lost in his moment of victory, he did not see the movement behind him. Reverend Pike, he had been hiding, his face pale, his hands shaking. He saw what was happening. Cole, the murdering animal, was confessing. He was tying them all to Willow Creek. Pike, the man of God, saw his reputation, his life, turning to ash. Cole was a loose end. Pike raised his small pistol. His voice was a thin, righteous tremor. "Ephraim, you have confessed to murder. You have brought shame on this valley. May God forgive you." He was aiming at the back of Ephraim Cole. Cole heard him. He tensed, his head turning. "Pike, you!" A single, sharp shot, louder than the pistol of Pike. It was Silas Blackthorne. His face was cold stone. His pistol was smoking in his hand. Reverend Pike looked down at his own chest, a dark, spreading stain. He looked at Blackthorne, his eyes wide with a final, terrible understanding. He was a loose end, too. Pike crumpled to the ground, silenced forever. That shot, that moment of betrayal, was all Tahan needed. Cole was distracted. His grip on Eliza loosened for a single heartbeat. Tahan did not go for his rifle. He ran. He launched himself across the 10-foot gap of the canyon, a raw, physical explosion of muscle. He hit Cole like a boulder. The two men crashed onto the ledge. Cole's pistol fired wildly into the air. Eliza scrambled away. Tahan and Cole rolled, a desperate tangle of limbs. They were at the very edge of the cliff. Tahan was larger, but Cole was fighting with the strength of a cornered rat. Tahan got his feet under him. He shoved, with all his strength, all his rage, all his grief. Ephraim Cole screamed. It was a long, thin sound. He fell, tumbling end over end, until he hit the rocky canyon floor far below with a sickening, final sound. A stunned silence fell over the pass. It was broken by a high, piercing, unfamiliar whistle. Jedediah. He was on the high rim of the canyon, far above them. Luis at his side. He was blowing his official United States postal whistle. "They are coming!" Jed yelled, his voice cracking. "The Federals are coming! Ayoka sent a rider to the fort!" Silas Blackthorne looked at the pass entrance. He looked at the wagon. He heard the distant sound of a bugle. He was trapped. His face, for the first time, showed an emotion. Not fear, pure, unadulterated hatred. If he could not have this valley, no one would. He ran to his own wagon, the one trapped by May. He tore the canvas cover off. There were 2 barrels. Pine oil, the poison. "Silas, no!" May yelled, raising her rifle. He was too fast. He smashed the barrels with an axe. The thick oil poured onto the dry canyon floor. He pulled a match from his pocket and threw it. the world turned into fire. The explosion was a deafening roar. A wall of black, greasy flame shot up, the smell of Willow Creek filling the air. It was the past, returned. The fire licked at the wagon of May, at the dry brush, turning the pass into a furnace. Eliza looked up. She was above the fire. She saw the new, raw cut in the earth, the ditch, the Blackthorn waterway from the map. They were high in the mountains, near the source. She scrambled up the rocks, toward the head of the ditch.
Tahan, cover me!
She saw it, a heavy wooden lever, the temporary headgate for the ditch. She grabbed it. She pulled. It was heavy, stuck fast. She strained, her feet slipping. Tahan was beside her. He added his strength to hers. With a groan of splintering wood, the gate gave way. A rumble, then a roar, the creek, a torrent of cold, brown mountain water. The life of the valley, turned from its true path, now poured into the new ditch. It surged down the man-made scar and into the rock pass. It hit the fire. Steam exploded, a thick white cloud that blinded everyone. It was a war of water and fire. The flood hit the Blackthorn wagons, sweeping them away. It washed the burning oil, the supplies, the very memory of the camp, down the canyon. The water was returning. It was cleaning the valley. Into this chaos of steam, smoke, and flood rode a column of blue-coated cavalry. They were led by a stern-looking federal officer. Silas Blackthorn stood on a rock, his fine suit ruined, the water swirling around his knees. He was a king with no kingdom. "Arrest that man!" Eliza yelled. She was standing on the ledge, Tahan at her side. She held up the heavy postal seal. She held up the ledger. The soldiers surrounded Blackthorn. He did not resist. Tahan and Eliza climbed down. They walked to the place where Cole had fallen. The flood was receding, leaving mud and ash. "He was alive, broken, but alive." The federal officer dismounted, walking toward them. "Who is in charge here?" Cole was coughing, mud and blood on his lips. He saw the officer's insignia. He knew it was over. "It was me," Cole whispered. "The fire service. For Blackthorn. Willow Creek, the Judge Thatcher, he was in on it all." He confessed, his voice a dying rattle. He confessed to the officer, to Eliza, to Tahan, and to the soldiers who gathered around. His eyes rolled back. His body went still. Eliza stood, the water soaking her boots, the steam rising around her. She looked at Tahan. The fire was out. The canyon was a ruin, a scar of mud and ash, steam still rising in the cold air. Silas Blackthorn, his hands bound, stood beside the body of his lawyer, Hale, who had been struck by a stray bullet in the final chaos. The game was over. The surviving hired guns, stripped of their weapons, sat huddled, their faces blank with defeat. Marcus Thorne, the special envoy, was a man who did not waste time. His face was like carved granite, his eyes missing nothing. He stood near the body of Ephraim Cole, listening to the final, sputtering confession until the deputy's eyes went still. Eliza Hart walked toward him. She was soaked, her clothes torn, her face stained with smoke. Tahan was at her side. She held the proofs of their fight. "This is the Blackthorn ledger," she said, her voice raw. She handed the book to Thorne. "It shows the payment to Deputy Cole for what he called fire services." Thorne took the book. He turned a page. His eyes scanned the entry. "This is the map," Eliza continued, handing him the tin tube. "It shows their plan to steal the creek, to divert the water from the entire valley, from my land, and from the lands of the Commanche." Thorne unrolled the map. He compared it to the official territorial survey he carried in his own bag. His mouth tightened. "And this," Eliza said, holding up the heavy brass object, "is the United States Postal Seal." Jedediah, his face bruised but his eyes bright, stepped forward with Luis. "He threw it to her, sir, when Cole's men took me. I am the mail carrier for this territory. That seal represents the faith of the government." Thorne looked at the seal in her hand. This was the final piece. This was not a local dispute. This was a federal crime. The mail, the water, the law, all corrupted. He turned to his lieutenant. I am suspending every land claim, every mineral right, and every water diversion order signed by Judge Thatcher, effective immediately. Place Mr. Blackthorne in irons. He will be transported to the federal court to stand trial for conspiracy, murder, and theft of government property. Silas Blackthorne said nothing. He simply looked at Eliza, his pale eyes holding a coldness that would never thaw. Then the soldiers led him away. The soldiers were a temporary fix. The law was a blunt instrument. The real healing had not begun. Days later, after the bodies had been buried and the soldiers had returned to the fort, Ayoka sent out a call. They met in the valley, near the banks of the creek that now flowed free. There was no courthouse, no church, just the sky, and the clean, cold wind. Ayoka stood in the center. Her people, the Commanche, sat on the ground, their faces watchful. Tahan stood with them. The townsfolk came. May O'Rourke, her head still bandaged, sat on a log. Old Jed was there. The rancher, Peters, who had spoken up at the courthouse. They were hesitant, afraid, unsure of this new world they had entered. There has been much noise, Ayoka said. Tahan translated, his voice clear, carrying across the quiet assembly the noise of guns, the noise of lies, the noise of falling rocks. Now, there must be quiet, and in the quiet, we must speak the truth, all of it. The sickness in this valley was not just one man. It was the silence of all. She looked at the townsfolk. You came, and you saw us as ghosts. You feared us. You did not see our children. You did not see our need for the same water. You let a man with a piece of paper tell you that our lives were worth less than silver. She looked at her own people. We watched. We were angry. We remembered the broken promises. We did not speak. We let our pain become a wall. We saw you as a storm that would not end. The truth must be spoken. She said again, or this peace will not last the winter. Who will speak? There was a long silence. Then May O'Rourke stood. I will, she said, her voice rough. I watched Ephraim Cole terrorize this town for 3 years. I saw him bully the young, the poor. I saw him drink with the men who burned the granary. I kept my hammer down. I was afraid. I was afraid for my smithy. I was afraid of being alone. I said nothing. My silence was his partner. It will not happen again. She sat. Another silence. Then Peters, the old rancher, stood. At Willow Creek, he said, his voice thick. I was there. I helped put out the fire. I smelled the poison pine. I knew it was not an accident. I knew it was murder. I told no one. I told myself it was not my business. I was wrong. It was all of our business. I failed. One by one, they spoke. They spoke of fear. They spoke of greed. They spoke of old hatreds and quiet shame. It was a cleansing. It was a painful lancing of a wound that had festered for years. Finally, Eliza Hart stood up. The assembly went silent. She held the leather ledger of her husband. I came here seeking justice. She said, I thought my fight was simple. I thought I was avenging my husband, Samuel, who was murdered at Willow Creek. She opened the book. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. This is the book that proved Blackthorne's guilt, but it proves another truth, too, a harder one. She read the entry. She read the words of her husband, the waiver of water rights, the risk insurance, the plan to let the fire clear his debts. She told them everything. My husband, he was not the man I remembered. He was afraid. He was weak. He made a deal with Blackthorne because he was scared of being poor. He was a partner to the crime that killed him. She looked at the faces of the settlers. They were stunned. This was a private shame. I was going to hide this, Eliza confessed, tears running through the soot on her face. I was ashamed. I thought it would poison the case. I thought it would ruin his memory. She looked across the clearing at Tahan. But Tahan and Ayoka? They taught me that the truth cannot be in pieces. A half-truth is a whole lie. My fight was not for a memory. It was for the water. It was for the land. It was for all of us. Here, who have to find a new way to live. She closed the book. Samuel's fear his mistake, it is a part of this story, but it will not be the end of it. We must build on the whole truth, even the parts that hurt. She stood there, exposed and vulnerable. Tahan walked from the side of his people. He did not go to her. He stood in the center, beside Ayoka. My name is Tahan, he said. I am Commanche. I have raided. I have fought in anger. I have seen the blue coats kill my people. I have hated. My hate was a wall. I saw this woman. He gestured to Eliza. And I saw only another settler, another thief. I was wrong. I was blind. She brought me water. She hid me. She fought for my people's water. My people we must see. 2. We must see the ones like May, the ones like Jed. The truth is not one thing. It is many. We must braid them together. The meeting ended. There was no great celebration, just a quiet, sober understanding. The sickness had been spoken. In the weeks that followed, the valley changed. The change was slow, awkward. May O'Rourke reopened her smithy. The first person she hired as an apprentice was a young Commanche man, quiet and strong, sent by Tahan. The sound of 2 hammers on the anvil, one heavy, one light, became a new rhythm for the town. Old Jed was a hero. The postal service sent him a formal commendation. He hung it on the wall of his office, and sweeping the floor, his face bright with purpose, was Luis. He had a small, new leather mail pouch. He was the apprentice carrier. His first job was delivering messages of trade, of water levels, of lost cattle, between the ranches and the Commanche encampment. He was the bridge. On the hill overlooking the blackened ruins of Willow Creek, Eliza and Tahan built a small monument of stones. There was no name on it, just the words Willow Creek and the date. It was a grave for all of it. For Samuel, for Reverend Pike, for Cole, for the men who died in the canyon. A grave for the old way of thinking. Eliza, in her own heart, finally buried her husband. She accepted the truth. He was a man, flawed and afraid, and she had loved him, but his fear would not be her legacy. She and Tahan sat at her kitchen table. The wind blew through the open window, but it was a warm wind now, smelling of new grass. Between them was a single sheet of paper. The envoy said we must draw up a new water compact. Eliza said, one that the federal government will approve. Tahan looked at the blank paper. More words. The words of your people change with the wind. These words will not, Eliza said. She dipped the pen in ink. We will write them together. They did not draw lines of ownership. They drew the creek. They marked the springs Ayoka had shown them. Eliza wrote, in the dry season, the creek flows for all. No water is to be diverted. It is for the herds of the Numunu and the cattle of the ranchers. All will share. Tahan spoke. In the wet season, the farms may take what they need to grow food, but the heart of the creek, the main flow, must not be touched. It belongs to the valley. They wrote of grazing rights, of access, of how disputes would be settled, not by a judge, by a council made of 3 ranchers and 3 Commanche, with Ayoka to break any tie. When it was done, Eliza signed her name. Tahan took the pen. He looked at it. He put it down. He pricked his thumb with his knife. A single drop of blood. He pressed his thumb to the paper. Beside it, he made his mark, the sign of his family. Ash and ink, blood and paper. A new treaty. That night, Eliza sat on her porch. Tahan sat with her. The quiet was thick. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of peace. The only sounds were the insects, the call of a distant coyote, and the soft sound of the creek, running where it was meant to run. 3 winters passed. The scar on the canyon, once a raw wound of mud and ash, was healed over with sweet clover and willow. The Llano Estacado, the high, empty plains, remained a place of hard wind and vast sky. But the valley was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of change. The ranch of Eliza Hart, as it was still called by habit, was no longer a small, defiant square. It had grown. The house was larger, with 2 new rooms built of solid timber. The stable, rebuilt by Tahan and May, was strong. But the ranch was not alone. It was the heart of a community that breathed with 2 different lungs. Down the creek, the smithy of May O'Rourke rang with the sound of 2 hammers, one heavy, one light. Her new apprentice, a young Commanche man named He Who Follows, was learning the mystery of iron and teaching May the mystery of patience. The town's post office was no longer a dusty corner of the general store. It was a small, neat building run by Jedediah, who now spent most of his days reading old newspapers. The mail was carried by Luis. The boy, now a tall young man of 16, rode the trails with a federal pouch, a bridge of news and commerce, welcome in the ranches of the settlers and the seasonal camps of the Commanche. The treaty they had written, the one of blood and ink, was held as law. Tahan's people came with their herds in the dry season, their ponies grazing peacefully on the shared pastures. The valley had become what the outlaws had, in their greed, tried to create a cooperative, but it was one built not on theft, but on a shared, hard-won truth. The spring market, held in the town, was no longer a night of tension and whiskey. It was a celebration. Farmers brought their seed corn. The Commanche brought finely tanned hides and smoked jerky. May O'Rourke sold tools that were known for their strength. In the center of the street, where the bonfire of fear had once burned, there now stood a great, circular water trough, built by May. The water, diverted from the creek by a small, shared ditch, ran clean and cold. It was for anyone. Children played there. They ran in circles, their laughter mixing. Some had pale skin and sun-lightened hair. Others had dark eyes and black hair, their moccasins silent on the packed earth. They did not see a difference. They were just children. A small girl, perhaps 3 years old, with the dark, observant eyes of Tahan and the stubborn set of the jaw of Eliza, led the game. She splashed her hands in the trough, yelling in a happy mix of 2 languages. The news of the world came, as it always did, with Luis. He rode up to the ranch one afternoon in the fall, waving a letter. It was not from a widow. It was from Washington. Eliza opened it. She read it aloud, Tahan standing beside her on the porch. The trial was over. Silas Blackthorne, his power broken, his money gone, was found guilty on all counts. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison in the East. Judge Thatcher, his corruption exposed by the dying words of Cole and the evidence of the ledgers, was convicted on the same day. The letter from Marcus Thorne noted that the case had set a new precedent. Criminal acquisition by fire. The use of arson to seize land, once a dark tool of the frontier, was now a named and known federal crime. Their fight had sent a ripple across the entire territory. Eliza folded the letter. It was the end, the final, legal stone placed on the grave of the past. She went inside, to her desk. It was covered in papers. She was no longer just a rancher. She was a voice. She spent her evenings writing. She wrote to women she had never met. She wrote to widows in other territories, in valleys she would never see. She told them her story. She told them about the fire. She told them about the ledgers. Both of them. She told them the truth about Samuel, his fear and his mistake, and she told them what she had learned. Do not sell your land from fear, she wrote. Do not let the shadows of your past own your future. Stand in the light, even if it is a hard light. You are not alone. Tahan was also a teacher. He sat with the children in the evenings, his own daughter on his knee. He taught them the words that mattered. He would point to the creek, running just beyond the porch.
Pa!
Water, the children would repeat, their voices soft. He would point to the open ledger on the table, the one that held the compact. Tane. Truth, they would say. He would put his arm around Eliza as she sat beside him. Heitzi. Friend, his daughter would whisper, her head resting against his chest. The old life was not entirely gone. The habits of fear ran deep. One night, a cold wind returned. It was the first winter wind, the one that sounded like a scream, the one that rattled the new, strong windows. Eliza was asleep. She stirred. The sound of the wind, the memory of cold and ice, pushed her into the old posture of defense. She turned in her sleep. She turned her back to Tahan, pulling the blankets tight, facing the cold, dark wall. He woke. He felt the empty space beside him. He saw her, a small shape, huddled against the planks. He smiled. It was a quiet smile. In the dark, he did not speak. He moved, his arm going around her, strong and familiar. He gently, firmly, pulled her back. He pulled her from the wall. He settled her against his chest, her back to his front, his warmth covering her. She sighed in her sleep. She did not wake. She settled into his embrace. It was no longer a desperate act of survival in a frozen shack. It was the nightly, silent language of their peace. The past could call, but the present was here, warm and real, holding her safe. On the porch, hanging from a peg by the door, was the braided cord Ayoka had given her. It was dark now, worn by the sun and the wind. It was their reminder. The many strands, ugly and beautiful, woven together to make one strong line. In the small-town cemetery, there were new stones. One, surprisingly grand, marked the grave of Judge Thatcher. His family had brought him home, but no one ever left flowers. Further down, in an unmarked patch of ground, was the grave of Ephraim Cole. And near the fence, almost an afterthought, was a small, plain stone for Reverend Pike. Someone, perhaps May, had paid for a simple inscription. It read righteous words and an empty heart lead to destruction. The peace was not taken for granted. It was a living thing that needed to breathe and be fed. Every season, at the turning of the spring and the start of the fall, the council met. Ayoka, her face more lined but her eyes as clear as ever, would sit. May would be there, her hands stained with iron. Peters, the old rancher, would sit beside Tahan. They would read the compact aloud. They would check the level of the creek. They would settle small disputes over grazing or a lost calf. They were braiding the truth, season after season. The sun rose. It was spring again. In the year 1873, it touched the high mesas, turning them gold, and spilled into the valley. Eliza stood on the porch. The air was cold, but it smelled of new grass and damp earth. Tahan came out, a cup of hot coffee in his hand. He gave it to her. They stood together, watching the light. Their daughter ran out of the house, her bare feet pounding the wood, chasing a new puppy. They watched her run, the sun climbed, and their shadows, the shadow of the man, the woman, and the child, stretched long and clear on the good earth. The future was not a thing to be feared. It was a thing to be built, by hand, together, in the light. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below, and let us all connect and share our thoughts. Remember to subscribe to Wild West Tales, like this video, and press that hype button so this story and others like it can be heard by more people.